Hello tankers and tankettes, and welcome to a pair of viewer replays. Today I have decided we're going to take a little look at the Super Pershing, and we're starting off with this replay by phj.Cypher, who is in a match with entirely tier 8s. Both teams are entirely tier 8, and that's very, very pleasing somehow. That's like, imagine if you could get that kind of matchmaking more often. There's a lot of tanks that would be a lot happier as a result. So the Super Pershing, yeah, it's not what it used to be. The reason I get down on it a lot, and a lot of people, I mean, it's just not really a popular tank anyway as a premium. But the fact is that it used to be better. It actually got nerfed, and in case you don't know, it was the case that it was a severe enough nerf that Wargaming, for the first time ever, basically offered an in-game refund. If you had one of these prior to the nerf, you could sell it in-game and get back the full gold price of 7,200 gold. And I did, without much regret, because the nerf bat hit it pretty hard and it didn't really get much back in terms of compensatory buffs. So it was a fairly straight nerf. And I've never played it since, and it really is not without... It is without regret. I almost said it is not without regret, which would have meant the opposite, but it is without regret that I sold it and that I have not bought it back. It's one of the few premium tanks I don't have in my garage. I don't intend to buy it back unless it gets significant buffs at some point. But anyway, the one saving grace was, and still is, that it is the cheapest tier 8 premium. But if you consider that the Chasseur de Char, the new French tier 8 medium premium, is only, what, 250 gold more expensive? There's even less reason to buy a Super Pershing these days, basically. Anyway, phj.Cypher, the reason I've picked out this is that the strongest armour these days is really that turret counterweight. It's not even, like, historically that was not actually intended to be, crash the desk there, extra armour. That was actually an additional counterweight for the gun, because the whole idea of the Super Pershing was not an up-armoured Pershing, it was an up-gunned Pershing. And the armour was actually added later on when it was shipped over to Europe. So there's not that many tanks I know bits of history about, but the Super Pershing I know a little bit about. So the gun was the point of this, and yet in terms of its gun, it's actually got worse pen than the regular Pershing. And okay, yes, premiums are generally meant to be worse than their non-premium counterparts, but if you consider everything else the Pershing has going for it, yes. I mean, it's only 10 average less pen, but still. It would be nice, considering that the Super Pershing is so slow and comparatively underpowered that it just, you have to basically act as a pseudo-heavy, and it can't do that nearly as well as it used to be able to. Anyway, so the reason I picked out this replay is that phj.Cypher has been basically using this in just about the best way that you can these days. He's been hull down, he's been mostly facing enemies that have been hitting his strongest turret armour, which is that spaced counterweight, and he's been very, very intelligent in shooting for weak spots as well. Now he did switch to APCR at the end here, and the APCR has a lot of extra pen compared to the AP, but he's managed to rack up a fair amount of damage. And if you can get this kind of situation where, yeah, he had friendly artillery support and he had friendly tank support, and there was things like that enemy T-28 was only shooting HE at him for some reason, I don't quite know why, but he's been able to rack up a fair amount of damage. The reload's quite good. The gun stats, the hard gun stats, are more or less identical to the Pershing, apart from the 10 extra, the 10 less penetration. But the soft stats are actually worse than the Pershing, because reasons. So yeah, all in all, it was this was a fairly good game, and if you could have every game be like this in a Super Pershing, if you could have every enemy team be like this, then there would be no problem. But that, of course, isn't the case, and the Super Pershing, it doesn't really have the armour that it used to, and it doesn't have a gun to fight particularly as a pseudo-heavy these days, although it's still not bad, as you can see there. If you imply a bit of intelligence and aim for weak spots, as phj.Cypher was doing, things like not shooting at the hull of that Jagdpanther 2, for instance. He was shooting through the tracks up into the hull and getting damage that way, and tracking the guy at the same time, and going for the Carnarvon's the commander's hatch, you know, stuff like that. That all helps you, and he did well out of that game. He came out top of the team, not quite top damage, but top score. Most of his shots hit and penned. 3.1k damage got him 31,000 credits without premium. Would have been nearly double that with premium, even considering that he shot a bunch of his premium shells there, which I don't think he meant to. I don't think he meant to shoot that many APCR shells. And you saw at the end there when he was firing at the back of that T-28 prop, he obviously realised, yeah, unnecessary APCR spam. So yes, I don't think that was intentional there. He switched for a couple of the tougher enemies, the T-28 and the T-28 Prot, and then forgot to switch back. But hey, that happens in the heat of battle. So next up, it's Mackie 3, and this is an altogether very different kind of a battle. Now, we've joined him as he's going into the valley in Lakeville in a Super Pershing. I don't think that's the best plan, but it's what he goes for, and so, okay. He would have been better going to town, but I mean, there's always that. There are areas of the map that are less important, and yet sometimes, you know, you need somebody to go there anyway. And on this occasion, Mackie has chosen to be one of those people that goes to a less important area of the map. And so, although you can be, you know, you can have less to do and you can be less effective, it can nonetheless overall still contribute to a win, or indeed a loss. You know, it can go both ways. But as it is, it's him, an ISU, and an M103, and they've already spotted, actually, one of the enemy tier 9s is in the valley on the other side as well, an E75. Now, there's no artillery in this match, so they're a lot more free to just sit here and try and use their turret armour, although it's not like the Super Pershing turret is. It's not like it's totally impervious. I mean, I mentioned with a previous battle that it's now some of the best armour that it has. It used to be that the upper front plate was really good as well, and that was what really got hit by the nerf bat. But it's not like this was without weak spots. There was an MG port that you could fire through into the weaker hull armour behind, and there's also on the top there the commander's hatch with the counterweight tubes. That is a fairly easy target. You know, a lot of people know to shoot there. And actually, I will say, I forgot to point out with that last battle, but Blaze actually did a quite good job with the rubble he was hiding behind. He was effectively some of the time hiding that turret weak spot as well. So he was playing it quite smart. Mackie is maybe not playing it quite so smart, just being here in the valley to begin with, but anyway, apart from anything else, the Super Pershing is already hideously slow, and this is one of the slowest areas on any map. There's not that many maps these days that have this kind of swamp terrain still on them, but the Lakeville Valley area is one of them, and you could see him getting here. Yeah, it was not a fast process, particularly. So it looks like there's a good number of tanks in town. One of our IS-8s did go into town, but the other IS-8 that only just joined into battle, for some reason, also decided to come to the valley. Not quite sure why. That might prove to be decisive either way. But we know that there's two enemy tier 9s from the enemy team also on the valley, not just that E75, but at stock ST1 as well. But the fact he's a stock ST1 matters a little bit less with this matchmaking. Anyway, so again, weak spots. That kind of weak spot knowledge helps, and Mackie here is trying to go for the commander's hatch on the T-34. Not the most reliable place to hit a T-34 ever, but against a hull-down T-34, there's not that many other choices. There's actually just a little bit of armour immediately above the gun mantlet that you can try and go for, but that's an even smaller target. Like, you have to be quite close range to make that work. So the downside of this is, yeah, that shot sailed right over his head. The downside of this is that he has to sit still while he's, well, he doesn't have to, but when he's actually aiming these shots, he's got to sit still, and that potentially lets the T-34 shoot back at him. But that T-34, it's not really in a position to do that right at this moment, so he's relatively safe. And he's just able to keep firing those shots and hopefully pen them. And he's done a bit of damage so far, but it's not really anything to get excited about. So okay, the M103 takes out that T-34. Meanwhile, the tanks in the town have been pretty much wiped out. So that's not good. They lost to KV-5. There's a lone Type 59 that's trying to run away. And although it's only 6-8, if we're looking at the actual numbers of tanks, 7-8 now, the actual distribution of those tanks is, yeah, sometimes it's not so much the numbers of tanks remaining, it's where those tanks are. So this is not good. Those tanks from the enemy team are now going to push around, and they're going to threaten the cap. What's probably going to happen is that these remaining tanks are going to get caught in between the two. It's going to be a pincer movement, basically. Those tanks are going to come around behind them, close the trap, and that's it. And we can see there the Tiger and the E-25 that were in the middle coastal path. They're both dead now. So that's the last remaining resistance, apart from that Type 59 who's hanging on somehow. Anyway, Mackie has probably realised that this is more of a dire situation, so he's gone to his APCR, and that was an unlucky bounce actually. That hit the engine deck at such an angle that it bounced, possibly clipped the side of the turret. It was a little hard to see exactly where that shot landed. But anyway, we've also seen that there's an AC-46 down there, so he's going to have to be careful of that. The IS-8's turned around to go and face the cap, and I'm not sure what Mackie's thought process was here. I mean, again, he hasn't done any extra damage, so it's not anything like the other game so far where Blaze Cypher was just able to sit there and work that position and use his weak spot knowledge and get a really decent amount of damage out of it. But Mackie is at least trying to use the terrain here. He's trying to use his gun depression. He's trying to get shots down into these tanks. There we go. It takes a little extra time to aim that, and it goes in, which is good. And if we can kill that ST-1, that's one less tank shooting at them as well. So, I mean, it's got, what, minus 10 degrees gun depression. It's still pretty decent. But it's, I mean, in this case, it's useful because he's able to be more or less hull down against this E-75. There we go, going for the commander's hatch with the APCR. So even with a weak the APCR is still aiming for areas where he's more likely to pen, which is smart. You know, even with APCR, there's no point in getting lazy. His gun gets taken out, which is fine. Just going to let that repair rather than use his repair kit. Oh, and then he does use his repair kit anyway, so okay then. But as we can see, things aren't looking so rosy behind them. There's a Conqueror, that's the other enemy tier 9, and that's kind of unlucky. That didn't pen, actually. The Conqueror turret's not that bouncy, and the fact that that didn't pen with APCR is pretty unlucky indeed. So the IS-8 goes down. Those two look like they're trying their luck, but that's E-75 down, so that's good. It's just a tier 7 TD on that side now. But the friendlies are looking a bit like this was looking very, very close to being a loss to the enemy's capping, and then they decided not to cap. They got about 12 seconds away from winning this, and then they got greedy. So it's taken down the T-44, it's taken down that Jagdpanther, which is good. Took a hit in the process, but he's still got half his health left. It's like the first part of this battle was really not very interesting, and then suddenly it's an unlucky bounce on the Lerva. Probably went into the gun mantle and pinged off. That's the strongest armor that's got, because if it hit the side of the Lerva and bounced at that angle, that would be extremely unlucky. So we're down to an enemy ISU with 3 kills, who hasn't been spotted at all. Oh, that was a bit of a donked shot. And this AC-46, who really isn't that big of a threat. And there we go, he gets that kill. So that's 6 kills in the space of, what, 2 minutes? Something like that. It's not a very long amount of time. And the damage count isn't that high, but it's still pretty reasonable considering the alpha of the gun. It was shooting reasonably smart. I don't think his initial decision to come here was necessarily smart, but once he was here, he was at least making the best of the situation. So the likelihood would be, you would think that the ISU would be coming round from the other side of the lake, but for some reason the M103, I'm not sure what the M103 was thinking, but he starts pinging the valley and saying, let's go this way. Now, I don't know if the M103 was thinking they would go and try and cap the enemy base, or if it's that the M103 thought that the ISU would be coming through the valley, because we we don't know where the ISU has been at all. We only know that he has 3 kills. But it's reasonable to assume he was sniping from the enemy base. So maybe that's what the M103's thought process was, that the ISU was sniping from the enemy base and turned and came through the valley, which is actually entirely what happened. But we'll never know. Anyway, so the ISU fired, took out the M103, who never knew what hit him, basically. And this is a bit of a scary situation now, because unless the ISU really messes up, Mackie is an easy one-shot for this guy. And oh, yes, he has. He has, in fact, messed up. So, this is it now. I mean, unless he gets a low roll, that extra ramming damage, that actually helps. And there we go, he kills the ISU. So, he must have had his heart in his mouth there, and the tension was a bit high at the end of that. But he came through, he kept his head, and that ended up being a win for his team. Now, I will say, the previous game, Blaze, that was more that he was playing really well and playing to the strengths of the Super Pershing. In this second replay, although it was a bit more action-packed, although it was a bit more exciting, especially towards the end there, it was a bit heart-in-mouth, it was the enemy team's mistakes that gave that away, their overconfidence. They really seriously screwed up, and it ended up costing them the match. Let's not forget, they were 12 seconds from winning, and then they managed to throw it away. That takes some serious lack of, I don't know, but still, I'm sure people will go, oh my god, no, this wasn't, why did you show this? But Mackie played well considering the circumstances he was in, but it was having put himself in those circumstances to begin with that wasn't necessarily the best plan. But if he had gone to the town, he probably would have just died with the rest of his team. Being there with one more tank, Super Pershing, probably wouldn't have made that big of a difference. So if he had gone to the town, the chain of events might have worked out that might then have been a loss. It's just one of those things with World of Tanks where sometimes the wrong move ends up being the right move, and it doesn't necessarily mean that making that wrong move was tactically any better. It's just in that particular scenario, it ended up working out anyway. So there's always that, you've got to bear that in mind, that doing the wrong thing and getting a win out of it doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't do the wrong thing. It's just sometimes you get lucky. And I think in this case, he did kind of get lucky, but at the same time, if he hadn't been playing at least reasonably well, he wouldn't have been able to turn around and make that a win. So, hopefully you enjoy both of these very different replays, and if you did, you can leave any comments below, you can hit the like button, you can subscribe to my channel, and as always, stay tuned for more.